let's talk a little bit about genre, nature of genre, as it comes to understanding audience. This is kind of I don't usually do this till later in the year, but this will be good. I found more and more that learning to consider audience is a very useful thing for a writer to come to understand, particularly if they're writing for children. Remember, children goes up to 18, 19 in the publishing world. Start using the terminology that they use in publishing, by the way. So to start thinking of a professional, start talking in word counts, don't talk in page counts, because page counts can change very easily. So start talking word counts, and nowadays the standard is just to use the Microsoft Word count. It used to be, count the, format and this format and that, has an average page, words per page of this, yada yada. They don't use that anymore because we can just push a button, and now we get a word count, and so we use that. Yeah. So, so genre. Why is genre important to consider? Well, it is important to consider because genre will really help you place where you're going to market your book and place, even writing your book, certain decisions you might make. The thing to keep in mind is there are no rules, okay? There are guidelines that make a book more publishable or less publishable by the standards. Every book is going to break some of these, okay? The thing to do is to know what they are so that you can choose which ones are important to you and your story so you can break them wisely, all right? So, we'll start talking about length, okay? Length. On the short end of what we do in this class is what we call a middle grade novel, all right? A middle grade novel is a novel targeted. Scholastic targets theirs as young as 8. That's about the bottom of where you can go for middle grade, and it goes up to 13 or 14 at its maximum. The sweet spot for middle grade is 6th, 7th grade, okay? So, middle grade novels. Middle grade novels have, unless you have an established name, generally have a maximum of 55K words, okay? Around 50, 55. You can break this, but break it knowingly that this is a pretty hard one to bust out of, okay? They're pretty strict on this. The reason for this is they like to keep them short, to grab the attention span of as many kids at this age as possible. They want to be able to use large print and make the book feel like it's reading really quickly, okay? Feeling like it's reading really quickly is an important thing in publishing these days for whatever reason. They like, in certain genres, you to really feel like you're tearing through this book to give you a sense that the book is a real page-turner, okay? We don't do this in epic fantasy. But they love it in thrillers. In fact, if you go and you pick up your average, what's his name? Alex Cross books. What's that guy? He writes like a book a month. James Patterson. If you go look at your average James Patterson and then compare it to your average book in the science fiction fantasy section, you'll find that the pages on his are like this. Like, whereas over here, we're like that. Okay? You'll distinctly notice it. They have wider margins, larger print, more leading, space between the lines. And when you pick up that book, you really do tear through it because it's deceptively short. Okay? Or deceptively long, I guess is how you'd say it, because of that. They do like to do the same thing in middle grade when they can. All right? So, middle grade is 55K. What is middle grade? Middle grade generally, in our genres, are the whimsical stories. All right? Not always, but usually they're often the leave our world and go to another world. Kids sucked into Fantasyland are often middle grade. That's not the only thing that happens, but that's a common theme in middle grade. They are the fun adventure. Often They can be in school or not, but more often they're not in school. There are some that do take place in school. Whimsical. They tend to be third person, but not always. I'd say they're third person like 60% of the time, maybe 65. I don't know. What else? Is anyone else here a children's fiction major? They can or taking classes from some of the children's writers. They can steer me a little bit better here. Do I pretty much have it down?
They usually stick to one viewpoint.
One viewpoint. Yeah, you're right.
And a pretty simple plot.
Yeah. Simple plot. In fact, one way to visualize the simple plot is that most of them you read take place in like one day. That's very common. Okay? One day, or, that's not always the case, but it's a way to keep things simple. You're like, this is an adventure that happens this day. Or this summer. That happens pretty frequently too. I'm saying this, though Harry Potter was a whole semester, and the first Harry Potter book was very much middle grade, kind of straight down the line on a lot of these things.
I've noticed in a lot of them, like, the characters don't really need deep moral reasons for doing things.
Yeah, they're not deep moral reasons, they're having fun. Yeah. So some great examples of this. Fable Haven. Great example of this. And the book that was kind of inspired by, what is it, that fairy monsters book that they made a movie out of it. Spider-Man Chronicles. First Harry Potter book. What are some other ones that aren't what's that? Chronicles of Narnia are a great example of this. How about some ones that are not kids sucked into Fantasyland, but are still genre?
Guardians of the Ghoul.
Okay.
Ranger's Apprentice.
Ranger's Apprentice. I haven't read those, so I don't know for sure.
You've got Entwined, and you've got Magic Treehouse books, you've got
Yeah,
Wimpy Kid
the
books.
thing about Wimpy Kid and Magic Treehouse are probably the age one step younger.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, probably. But Nicula is also probably one step younger in the middle grade. Those are the books that are actually like 15,000 words. You can read them in like a couple hours, those are like chapter books. Middle grade is not chapter books. Middle grade is targeted at the kids who are done with chapter books but aren't quite ready for YA. But anyway, let's talk about YA then. YA is a larger genre. It generally goes 13-ish up to 19-ish. Your upper limit for middle grade or for YA is a lot more loose, but people tend to say they want 75K words as a starting point. Twilight was 120, and it still got published. That's the biggest one I've heard of recently from a new author that, but it does happen. But 75 or 80K, they are usually very frequently at school. Not always, but very frequently. Why would that be? Why would the middle grade ones take place in Adventure and Fantasyland, and in YA, Fantasyland comes to school?
Because that's what their life revolves around.
That's what life revolves around?
They're becoming a little more realistic and less head in the clouds.
Yeah, perhaps. Yep.
They want more of an escape from their regular life.
Perhaps. I don't know.
I feel like when you're younger, like, school's like, yay, school. And then when you're, like, YA, you're like, that's where all your problems are.
Right. It's where it's the conflict. School is conflict. It's where hi.
Isn't that a lot to do with adults, too?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, we left out one big thing.
Escape,
we did.
You can escape from adults by going to Fantasyland.
Yeah.
You don't when you go to school.
Yeah. Do you want to come in and sit down?
Oh, well, there are so many people. We were just sitting out in the hall. We're listening.
Really? How many of you are there?
Well, there's 3 of us.
Okay. All right. We could make room for you guys if we want to. One thing I forgot about middle grade, and this is huge. I can't believe I forgot this. Big difference between middle grade. Where do kids get books if they're middle grade kids? They're given to them by adults. Okay? Given by adults. If they're going to school library, they're often being pointed to a book. And so these middle grade books are, the librarians are so influential. They're still very influential in YA, but they're so influential here. The parents are buying the kids' books here. YA kids are where they start buying them themselves. or they're choosing them themselves, or they're picking the books distinctly because these are the books that they don't think that they would be told to read. Okay? That changes everything. All right? Despite what you may think, YA, or middle grade, edited for content. YA is not edited for content. Now that's going to change based on which imprint and you're going with and what their reputation is. Disney imprint is going to edit for content, but because it's a YA book does not mean they're going to edit for content. In fact, they're likely not to because the kids are in a rebellious stage. The kids want to read things that feel edgy. Edginess is big.
Hunger Games?
Yes. I don't know how to spell edginess. Edginess is big. Tithe is an example out of here. Tithe is a book by Holly Black, which she was one of the Spiderwick Chronicle writers. Tithe has the F word. It has pretty graphic sex. All of these things. Parents are like, but it's a kid's book. YA is not edited for content. Okay? Just understand that. You don't have to write that. You can be edgy in a different way. Twilight is edgy too. To a YA audience. But just understand that that's how the industry tends to view these things. It's not going to be the case for all publishers. That said, I've never had a publisher come and say, oh, you need to add X, Y, or Z into your book. They look to what the book is trying to achieve. And some books are going to try to achieve this level of super edginess like Tithe was doing, and other books are not going to. But Hunger Games is a great example. Hunger Games is an edgy book, okay? That's a brutal, brutal novel. And that's a YA book, all right? So, in middle grade, one thing to keep in mind is adults are useless. Okay? Adults are useless. This is a recurring theme. You don't have to do it, but almost all of them, they're useless. Anyone read Series of Unfortunate Events? Middle grade does. Adults are useless. How useful are the adults in Harry Potter? Not very. Particularly in the middle grade era. Harry Potter becomes YA. And you'll notice something about Harry Potter as Harry Potter becomes YA. It becomes edgier. It becomes the conflicts stop being whimsical kids in Fantasyland, and they start being the big YA trope of boys/girls. Okay. There are some things. Oh, we've got a chair.
Yeah, I have to go because I'm not feeling well.
Okay.
Can you tell my group that I sent them an email?
Okay. Group, he sent you an email. We'll see you next week. Make sure you submit for next week, all right?
I will.
Okay.
Probably that gummy bear yay.
Yeah, probably that gummy bear from the floor. Boys and girls, okay? Boys and girls is huge in YA. It's barely touched on in middle grade, okay? Yes.
Do you mean like the literature distincts between boys and girls, or like it's targeted to boys?
No. I'm talking more about the idea of boys noticing girls, girls noticing boys.
I started doing that, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, J.K. Rowling is a brilliant writer, and their main focus of her brilliance is her understanding of children. All right? And you can see as the books become YA for middle grade, you can see exactly a lot of the things we're talking about. She transitions her books into that, and it works very well. So, Angst. Did I spell angst right?
Yeah.
Angst. That's the big thing in YA. Problem novels. You know what I mean by problem novel? No. I have bulimia, but it's my secret thing that I'm not going to tell anybody about, and I'm going to struggle with it, and it's so hard. I shouldn't make fun of, It's a real thing, but there are so many I have bulimia books. They're called teen girl problem novel books. And they are targeted at, I have depression, I have this, I have that. These are all YA things. They don't do that as much in middle grade. So, am I missing anything here?
Do adults and parents become more like the problem?
Yeah, that's what I was. Oh, I was going to do that. Yeah, parents are useless, and why adults are the problem. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Adults are untrustworthy. You don't have to do any of this, ULTS. And so you can kind of see like the difference between so Spider Chronicles versus like Percy Jackson's over here, right? And you can kind of see why those two books. And so these are guidelines for if you're kind of looking at where you're going to target your book. Shannon Hale has kind of an interesting story that she tells where she took the Goose Girl and was targeting it at adult fantasy publishers. And she didn't get it published until she sent it to Bloomsbury, Harry Potter's publisher, and they said, "Oh, this is a YA book. We're going to move the protagonist down 2 years in age, and we're gonna release it as a YA novel." And so, knowing your target audience for your book can be very helpful for these kinds of reasons. Usually, I would say write the book that you want to write, and throw aside anything that gets in the way. However, if the book you want to write is going to work equally well if you do one of these things or not, then doing one of these things that makes it more in line with kind of what works in that genre that you're shooting for is usually a really good idea. Does that make sense? So let's jump into the adult genres. Do note that there are several epic fantasy YA. I think Ranger's Apprentice probably fits in that. I haven't read it though. Just from looking at its packaging, it might actually be a middle grade. And that's because, fantasy bleeds young. It also bleeds old. And so back in the old days when I was growing up, my schools, we'd started to see YA divisions appearing and around, but they hadn't hit Nebraska yet. And so my library had children's division and adult division. There was no YA division. YA came about as a division because people started realizing teens didn't want to go into the children's section to get books. That can be another thing to divide the two in your mind. The middle grade kids don't mind running over into the children's section to get their books. They look in the independent reader section. They're happy going in the children's section. They still, they may not be as interested in the toys, but they don't feel offended that they're still kids. Because, they're like, yay, kids club. We're kids. Kids rule. As soon as they say, I'm not a kid, they're YA. For most kids. And that's one of the big dividing lines. And so they took all of those teen books and they put them in their own section outside of the kids section, and suddenly teens started grabbing them and reading them. Now, during the era when I was growing up, probably some things such as Sword of Shannara, David Eddings, some of these novels, Tamara Pierce, that we read as just being in the fantasy section, probably would be targeted as YA books nowadays. It's a really hard dividing line in true epic fantasy, because something like Sword of Shannara, you're not going to set it in school. It's going to be more of the whimsical adventure, but it's going to be a more adult-themed whimsical adventure. You're losing a bit of the whimsy and adding more of the angst, and suddenly you end up with a YA epic fantasy instead of a middle grade epic fantasy, and that kind of bleeds over into adults.